Great to be here with all of you, and particularly with you, Maryanne.
Great to be here as well.
So first, let's do some definitions. What is impact investing?
That's actually a big space. Well, can we hear okay?
Microphone problem.
Oh, okay. There we go. Now we're back.
Okay.
We'll try that again.
Yes, now we can hear you. Impact investing.
Impact investing is taking your capital and directing it towards good at the biggest, simplest level. There can be lots of different variations of that. It can be making sure that the capital that you have, the investments you're making, are doing no harm. That's a big step forward. It can be making sure that companies that you're investing in or that the companies themselves are producing their goods in the best possible way with the lowest carbon footprint or with the best supply chain practices. Or it can be one of the most exciting parts of this, investing and bringing capital to companies where the output of what they do is actually good for the world. So that's healthcare or education or clean energy.
So why analytics? What does it do? How does it interface with impact investing?
So the why basically means we bring research and capital together for good. That's the basics of this. And what that means is that there are thousands of people out in the world every day who are experts and really spend their whole lives studying how to make good happen in the world. So how to help increase maize productivity in a healthful way in sub-Saharan Africa, or how to include people from financial products that help formerly unbanked people save, or scientists who understand truly how to reduce the carbon footprint. So what we do is we help to tap into all of those people and their research and bring that to corporations or investors who are trying to make better decisions.
That information was not available to them before?
It's not so much as not available, it's that it's hard to access. And if you think about many people who are dealing with finances, investing, corporations every day, that's not their job in some ways. It's not their skill set. And so our team, for example, is looking at dense economic papers and understanding and reading all the detail of the science behind something and then translating that in a way. So much of it is actually publicly available data and information, but it's not easy to access. How
confident are you in the quality of the data that you're pulling together and then disseminating to others?
Actually, we spend a lot of time assessing the quality of it because frequently it can range quite widely. It has been truly inspiring to see how much research and data is available, though. So starting point is there's a lot out there that can be tapped. And as companies, by the way, start to disclose more and more information about what they're doing, partly because they are forced to and partly because they want to, there's even more data that can be used. So one piece is there's a lot out there that can be tapped. But there are always issues with that data. And so a lot of the work we do is to understand how trustable it is, and then to actually give it a score to say, how do we use this with confidence?
And as you pull this data together, do you discover that there are gaps, that there are areas that have not been adequately studied? And what are you doing to fill those gaps?
There are gaps, and they're important gaps. And the exciting thing is that there are institutions all over the world who are trying to fill those gaps. So one, for example, has to do with natural capital. That is the idea that there is actually value, and how do we place a value on our forests, on our coral reefs, on those aspects of the environment that are nature. So Stanford and the Natural Capital Project and many others around the world are dedicating research now to that.
So the metrics in this can be kind of tricky, I imagine. So for instance, if you're studying microloans, if a woman, for instance, replaces the mud floor in her home with a wooden floor, that's not going to show up in a country's GDP,
right.
And yet it's doing good. So how do you account for things like that?
Well, first of all, you're not going to accomplish all of it. You're not going to capture all of it. And part of what we do is try to understand what the major pathways are, the material pathways for good or bad impact. So we have to admit from the start that this is an imprecise. It is imprecise, but it gives us directionally more information about how to make a good decision. So that's one important caveat. But one of the things that is really interesting is that a lot of the research that's out there is looking at micro advances. And so some of you may be aware that the recent Nobel laureates this year in economics actually are dedicated to this field. And so maybe I can bring it to life with an example from some of their early work. They were looking at healthcare and education in sub-Saharan Africa, actually in Kenya. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out is what were the things that could keep kids in school and what were some of the impacts of that. Well, things that might intuitively be good, like providing kids uniforms, providing kids books to go to school, also providing them with deworming medication so that they weren't sick and they could actually go to school. All of those actually work. All of those actually help kids stay in school. But for about $1,100 is what it costs to have the effect of 1 year of school for kids if you invest them in free uniforms. For that same $1,100, you could get about 132 years of school. They both work, but one works substantially better. And so there's actually research that gets into that level of detail. Now, it doesn't cover everything in the world, but leveraging that is a really exciting place to be.
And I suppose another factor would be, is it better to affect a few people deeply or a lot of people not so much, but some?
Well, the answer is it's not better either way. It's both, and that's part of why we magnitude. That's part of why we get into the metrics, not because you can value everything in this world, but because by doing that exercise, you can understand the magnitude. The lose situation is when you are affecting a few people at a very shallow level, right? So understanding the depth, the breadth, the longevity, the short term versus near term or versus long term. Are you educating someone today, or are you investing in a life sciences product that will help people in 10 years? Understanding all those dimensions through what we do is bring that research and value that impact allows you to make that informed decision.
Right now, how much investment is impact investment?
Well, the Jeanne, which is the organization, the body that really is sort of in this industry space, would say it's about $500 billion, which in the concept of trillions of dollars that are invested globally every year is a drop in the bucket. But it's still substantial and growing. One of the things that's really important and interesting in that is that a fair amount of that is actually through development banks, development and government-related institutions, and then some of that, a smaller fraction of that is private. That's at the narrowest version of impact investing. There are much broader versions, and so you may be familiar with aspects of investing which screen out companies that might have behaviors or be producing products that you don't like, right? That is a much broader pool of capital at this point.
So one presumes that investors make investments to make money. And one of the popular preconceptions has been that impact investing isn't going to make as much.
Right.
Is that accurate?
That's actually not accurate. What is true is that there's a spectrum of issues, and then in terms of the capital that needs to be allocated to them and the returns that you can get. So if you're investing in a company where the output of the company is the good that you're trying to create, it is more patients served or more students educated, then the better the company does at its impact, the better it does at its finances. Now, that allows for market rate of return types of returns. Now, that's not going to solve every problem in the world. There still is need for concessional or catalytic capital, which does come at either a longer time horizon or a slightly different market rate, return rate. And there is still important roles for government and philanthropy. So in other words, there's a spectrum of this, but it's actually false at this point that you can't make a return.
I presume that one of your goals in producing this data is to persuade more investors to do impact investing. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely.
Is it working?
Yes, it is. And what we see is that it's coming from a number of different sources. Part of it is that people can make more confident decisions if these type of metrics and this type of research is available. It's also coming from the fact that the large institutional investors around the world, particularly in Europe and Asia, but also now here in the US, are calling for this. It's also happening when employees are asking for their companies to make more impactful decisions. So we are part of what I'd say is a whole movement that's helping to bring capital to these spaces.
So it is changing the definition of return on investment?
Yes, it is, absolutely. That can take form of, people often refer to it as a double or triple bottom line. There's a lot of different ways to think about that, but it is recognizing that the good of the investment is critical to the future of our world, and also that is critical to the future of the financial stability of that company.
So I watch television and I see ads from the big oil companies saying, we're making green investments. And the skeptic in me is going, oh yeah.
Right.
Is there a lot of that going on, so-called impact washing?
Right. So part of what our whole purpose is to help avoid or do away with impact washing by making transparent what actually is happening in companies and in investments. There is a lot of it. And that's not to say it's specific just to the oil companies. By the way, some of them are making good investments. The question is, how does that net out across the entirety of a company, any company? The focus on it is calling upon companies to think about this more holistically and therefore to bring forward more facts about what they're doing.
And is it changing behaviors by the companies?
I think
we talked about how it's changing investor
Right.
behavior, but is it changing company
It is.
behavior?
I think that we have a long way to go, for sure. But again, when you have the triumvirate of employees, customers, and investors clamoring for this, that actually aligns incentives. And if you think about this, most of my career was actually working with corporations as opposed to with investors. A lot of people want to do the right thing. And if you align the incentives across those three groups of employees, customers, and investors, it allows people to do the right thing.
Please submit your questions for Maryanne versus via Slido, if you would. So you're 1 year into this project. Has it made a difference?
Yeah. One of the really most privileged things I get to do, I love my job, is to see the companies that are actually invested in grow and come to life. And so the genesis of Winalytics was spun out of the RISE Fund, which is a $2.1 billion fund, and now they're raising their second fund, to invest in companies, both in emerging markets in the US, where the output is socially and environmentally good. This was originally founded by TPG and Bono and Jeff Skoll. And to see these companies and what they're doing in the world is the most invigorating thing. These are companies, again, that are creating life sciences solutions so that we can have non-surgical ways of removing glaucoma. Think about the impact for that of people around the world who can't access surgery. It's hospitals. It is incredible technology that helps kids learn math in a much more personalized way. So to see these companies and to be able to be part of bringing the impact story to life and testing it and making sure that investments that shouldn't be made are not made is incredibly exciting.
Dan asks a great question. Are there any examples of impact investing where the outcomes were not as good as investors hoped? What have you and other impact investors learned from past missteps?
Yes, there are. And I think what we've learned is that, first of all, a healthy dose of humility is good in many walks of life. This is one of them. And part of the reason is because impact is simply not intuitive. You can't sit here in New York and understand what is going to have impact in Nairobi. It just doesn't work that way. And that's why we try to contribute to that evolution to avoid the mistakes by turning to third-party research. We don't get to make up what impact is and what qualifies, nor should the investor or the company. So yes, there absolutely are missteps, and there will be more, by the way. And so bringing as much rigor to those decisions as we can is critically important.
In the past, it has been largely intuitive, hasn't it? It's what people felt in their guts.
Right.
I think this is going to do
and
good.
by the way, the word intentionality is something that is both a real good, but it also can be a limiting if we stop at intent. Intent allows for some intuition. I want to do good. Well, let's test that. We should have confidence. The billions of dollars that are being invested at this point, the trillions of dollars that are invested around the world globally, we should have a lot more confidence, just like we would make any financial decision, about what those underlying assumptions are about the impact we're going to have.
Another question, how do you evaluate impact before you invest? What are the best predictors of success?
Sure. So anyone who's familiar with a financial analysis that you would do upfront of any type of project, a capital expenditure project, an investment, it's actually not that dissimilar from that. What we're doing is we're taking the company, we're looking at the company, and we're identifying what are the pathways of impact, positive or in some cases negative. Maybe they have, maybe producing their product actually has environmental effects that are detrimental, right? We need to think about those. So we take a look at the company, we look at the pathways for positive and negative impact, and then we turn to third-party research to understand what's the closest analog to the change that that company is going to have, the experience that our beneficiaries are going to have, and what's the value of that based on third-party research.
Great. Thank you so much, Maryanne Hancock, CEO of Y Analytics.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us.
Great to see you all.
Thank you.